Across the globe, freshwater ecosystems mitigate climate change, support economies, and underpin sustainable development for billions of people. However, human development, widespread mismanagement, and a failure to recognize their true value has destroyed many freshwater ecosystems and pushed others to the brink of collapse. 80% of the world's wetlands have already disappeared, and at least 1 in 5 river basins are experiencing dramatic changes in available surface water. A continuation of this trend will see an increase in climate volatility, food insecurity, and greater migration as people flee areas of water scarcity. To ensure their survival and our own, we need to restore our degraded lakes, rivers, wetlands, and aquifers, and protect these essential resources in a way that balances economic, social, and environmental demands, enabling them to serve both people and the planet far into the future. There has been some progress towards the UN's Sustainable Development Goal 6 of clean water and sanitation for all, but there is an urgent need for all countries to do more. If we are to maintain good quality water in sufficient quantity to meet both current and future demands, then we must act now to protect and restore our ecosystems worldwide.
On behalf of UN Water and UNEP, I welcome you all to this webinar on the progress of freshwater ecosystems. This is related to the SDG target 66 and its indicator 661. My name is Joachim Harlin. I head up the freshwater ecosystem unit in UNEP, and we have a role as custodians for the 661 indicator. So this indicator, which monitors the target 66, is about the protection and restoration of water-related ecosystems. And the indicator is formulated as change in the extent of water-related ecosystems over time. So what are these water-related ecosystems? We're going to hear much more about those details in a bit, but just to give an overview, we have rivers and estuaries, mangroves, lakes, artificial water bodies, vegetated wetlands, and we also look at aquifers. Now, when we started off this work, we were initially asking for countries to report back in the first round. But now, when we did this latest data drive, we realized that we needed to have comparable data across the globe. And with the advancing technologies using Earth observations from satellites, we're now able to provide very detailed information on changes in spatial extent and also some parameters related to water quality for these water-related ecosystems. So we're going to hear very much more about that in just a little bit. But before we go there, I would like to encourage you all to register your details in the Zoom chat, and also that you feel free to post questions throughout. Use the chat function or the Q&A function and post your questions there, and we will monitor that and pick it up in the questions and answer session. We're especially interested to hear from you how this data can be used to improve and advance protection and restoration of freshwater ecosystems and uptake in your countries. So with those words, again, welcome to this webinar. And now we're going to hear a few words from the UN Water Vice Chair. Thank you.
Dear colleagues and friends of water, thank you very much for joining this webinar today to discuss progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 6. This webinar is part of a series of webinars taking place this month, each focusing on global progress towards a specific SDG 6 indicator and target. Before we get into the details, I wanted to share a few important messages about overall progress towards SDG 6 and how the UN is working together to report on our progress. We are now 6 years into the SDGs. And for the first time, we have water and sanitation data from almost all the countries in the world. This country data were compiled last year by the UN custodian agencies who joined forces under the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6, or as we fondly call it, IMI SDG 6. The unprecedented level of reporting is a major accomplishment for us as a global community, but even more so for all the country focal points who are joining us in this webinar. On behalf of UN Water, I would like to thank all of you for your extra hard efforts in monitoring SDG 6 in your country this year, especially in the difficult times we've been all living through. When we look at this data, they sadly confirm the tendency that we first saw in 2018, that we are off track to achieve sustainable water and sanitation for all by 2030. Taking a look at some of the hard facts about SDG 6, we see that billions of people worldwide still live without safe water and sanitation and basic hygiene services. Nearly 10% of the world's population still live in areas with extreme water stress. We know that wastewater is being released untreated into the environment, and 1 in 5 of the world's river basins are changing rapidly, which is exacerbated by changes in climate. We see that sustainable management of water resources remains out of reach for many countries. The data show that in order to meet our goals and targets, we are going to need to accelerate progress, and in some areas, up to 4 times faster to be able to meet SDG 6 within the next 9 years. More than anything, we're going to need politicians and policymakers at all levels to be able to set bolder priorities and quickly. But the good news is that we already have a lot of sustainable solutions in place. Last year, UN Water launched the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework with the full backing of the UN family to mobilize action across government, civil society, and the private sector across the UN to be able to better align our efforts, optimize financing, and enhance capacity and governance. From our work with countries and from their data, we've learned a lot about opportunities for accelerating progress. We've learned about the importance of scaling up capacity building, coordinated action, mobilizing political will. And of course, we've learned how data and information can be used to better guide policy and decision makers in their work. Because despite these heroic monitoring efforts of the last year, we still see large data gaps. Our ambition and hope with this data and with our SDG 6 reports are to further encourage and support national and subnational data collection, and ultimately help policy and decision makers to take informed action. This is what IMI SDG 6 will be focusing on as we go forward, and we call on the entire water community from global to local efforts to join us in taking this forward. I wish you a very fruitful and lively webinar today, and very warmly welcome you to join the other indicator webinars that we're organizing this month. Thank you for your attention and for all of your continued efforts to drive progress towards our common goal to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly Ann, and thank you, Joachim Harling, both for your words, your introductory remarks, and also those inspiring words from the Vice Chair of UN Water. Good afternoon and good morning to everybody. My name is Stuart Crane, and I'm going to take you forwards now through this Freshwater Ecosystems webinar. And my role in support of the United Nations Environment Programme is the technical lead on Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 6.6.1. And before we go into the results, I just wanted to set the scene a little and to convey the sort of basic premise of the indicator, which, as Joachim Hallin had mentioned, utilizes satellite-based Earth observations to monitor changes in freshwater ecosystems from space. And this is an incredibly valuable set of data that we have at our disposal. And the way in which we provide this information out to countries is that we separate it out into surface water bodies. And those surface water bodies comprise what we know as permanent water. We're able to separate out seasonal water bodies, those that come and go during the year, and also those surface water bodies that are artificial reservoirs. In addition, we're able to observe from space and satellite data two parameters of water quality. They are trophic state and turbidity, and we can see trends in those two parameters from very large lakes. And lastly, we're able to observe changes in a very specific freshwater ecosystem type, which is wetlands. And we're able to separate wetland ecosystems into those that are on the coast, mangroves, and all the other wetland ecosystems that are inland, which we group as inland wetlands, but may commonly be called peatlands and marshes. And that is the kind of data that we have at our disposal now, thanks to huge volumes of satellite data. And an SDG indicator 6.6.1 utilizes all of that information and has very recently launched a progress report in which the freshwater trends, according to those different ecosystem types and availability of data, is detailed at a global level and at a regional level. And if you want to access the report on the global report on indicator 6.6.1, this is available both at the UN water site, SDG6 monitoring.org, but also on UNEP's water page. So please feel free to access it there. It's also available at the Freshwater Ecosystem Explorer, and I'm going to, after I've presented on the global trends, I'm going to then provide a live demonstration of that Freshwater Ecosystem Explorer. Very briefly then, just to say that because of the huge wealth of data that we have at our disposal, and UNEP being the custodian agency for indicator 661, I think it's useful just to very quickly mention that we obtain this data per ecosystem type on surface water, water quality and wetlands on an annual basis, covering the entire period of the year. And we then go through a process of sharing that data with national indicator focal points and national statistical offices in countries. We then seek approval of that data. Only once that data is approved by countries does it then become official SDG indicator data that UNEP reports on behalf of countries to UNSD. And it's that officially reported data that we have that we analyze and forms the basis of all of the analysis that is within the global report that's just been launched on progress on freshwater ecosystems. Okay, so what global trends are we observing? There are three global trends that I want to draw your attention to. The first of these, and Kellyanne mentioned this in her video message to you, is that if you look at all surface water across the globe, and you look at changes to that surface water right down to a 30-meter resolution, and you look at a very, very long time series of those changes going back 20 years, what we're able to do for the first time ever is provide a global analysis that looks at changes per river basin. And what we can say is in the last 5 years of the last 20-year period, the world has experienced very, very rapid changes to its available surface water in 1/5 of the world's river basins. And on this global map here, you can see those river basins. So they are delineated here by color. We have those basins that are experiencing very high increases in their surface water extent, their surface water area, in light blue color here. And when you look at this global map, we're able to correlate the location of these high change basins with areas that we know are experiencing either increases in their increases in floods, inundation of their agricultural land, in particular a rapid increase in artificial water bodies, and all of that information is being picked up by the satellite data and shows us where these river basins are experiencing very rapid increases. Similarly, those basins that are experiencing a rapid decrease in their available surface water are also shown here and highlighted in this yellow color on the map. And again, these basins that have experienced this decrease correspond to known locations where in the world which are experiencing increasing drought conditions, where we're seeing the drying up of permanent water bodies, the shrinking of permanent water bodies, the shrinking of floodplains, and the loss of inundated wetlands. And all of that data is being captured here. And I should add that this data actually accounts for the natural variations that exist hydrologically. So that's why we use a very large 20-year timescale. And so the changes that we're experiencing, these are the really way above normal changes. So they're very dramatic increases or very dramatic decreases compared with a 20-year baseline. So that's very significant. And what does these changes mean? Well, these changes to our freshwater ecosystems and our hydrological regimes are caused by human activities. Demand for water from increasing populations has redefined our natural landscapes into agricultural and urban land. And that's what we're seeing. And of course, global precipitation and temperature changes are exacerbating this problem. And freshwater quantity and freshwater quality is being compromised as a result. So this is the first global trend that I would like to convey. Now, the second trend that I would like to bring to your attention is on wetland ecosystems. Now, there's, as you can see from this graphic in front of you now, what we're seeing quite clearly is a loss, a global loss in both coastal and inland wetland ecosystems. And in fact, we estimate that we've lost over 80% of our wetland ecosystems since the pre-industrial time. That's giving us only 20% of wetland ecosystems remaining. We estimate that to be somewhere between 10 and 12 million square kilometers of wetland ecosystems left on the planet. And the areas covered by coastal mangroves has declined globally by 4.2% just since 1996. And wetlands are incredibly important ecosystems that aren't often spoken about. They're needed to mitigate climate change. They reduce the impacts of flooding and of droughts. They help retain water, retain nutrients. They help to purify water. They protect biodiversity loss. And over and above all of those services, they also retain huge amounts of carbon, trap them in the soil, and sequester huge amounts of carbon from the air. So they're incredibly valuable freshwater ecosystems on a global commons perspective, and something that we must pay attention to when we look at this perpetual decline in these particular freshwater ecosystems. And this is the second global trend that I would like to convey to you. The third and the last global trend that I'd like to convey is on water quality. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's two aspects to water quality that we're able to assess from space, from satellite imagery. One is turbidity, and turbidity is a measure of the cloudiness in water. And actually, this is what we call a proxy indicator. It's not an in situ measurement, it's taken from a satellite. However, it's a good proxy indicator. And that's because we know there's a strong correlation between water bodies, lakes, for example, that have very highly turbid conditions with poor ecosystem health and poor human health accessing that water. And this is because bacteria and other germs cling onto the particulate matter in water. So high turbidity is often an indication of water pollution. And UNEP did an analysis of a sample of the world's large lakes. We looked at about 2,300 lakes, and we looked specifically at the data in 2019 in that sample of lakes. And what we found in 2019 is that 1/4 of those lakes that we sampled had high to extreme turbid conditions during 2019 when compared with a 5-year baseline. So that's obviously also cause for concern. When we overlaid population data on those, the quarter of those sample size, what we found was that relates to 21 million people living in very close proximity to those high to extreme turbid lakes. Therefore, it's a high chance that the populations living close by are accessing and using that water. Of course, this poses a risk to human health, but also highly turbid conditions also pose ecosystem risk to the ecosystem health. The other parameter that we're able to assess from satellite imagery is on trophic state. And while we don't have a similar analysis, we just have not conducted that similar analysis on trophic state, we are able to look lake by lake and see for many of the world's large lakes, highly trophic conditions concentrated in certain parts of that lake. And trophic state really looked at biological matter within lakes and how that matter essentially causes algae to grow and a phenomenon known as harmful algal blooms. And we can see this color distortion of the lake water from space. And so we're able, as you can see from this graphic, to identify very specific areas close to lake shores, very often where you're having nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from agricultural land, creating these harmful algal bloom events. So this is a picture on lake quality that we're seeing. It's also a slight cause for concern at this global trend level. So what can we do about this? And what we've tried to put forward, UNEP and the authors, the progress report on freshwater ecosystems, is 3 acceleration actions. The first of these is to implement and enforce national and river basin level policies. Now, this sounds common sense, but in many places they don't exist, not ecosystem specific and not river basin specific. And we have to take account for the fact that freshwater ecosystems within a basin are interdependent. So one action upstream may actually influence adversely another ecosystem type downstream within a basin. And therefore, it's very important when you're implementing laws and policies to protect freshwater ecosystems that we consider them at this basin scale. And therefore, governments are being urged to act to develop and implement action plans and roadmaps and investment portfolios and legislative frameworks and mechanisms that allow for the identification and the protection of their priority freshwater ecosystems. And the word here is really effective on protection. There are parts of the world that have existing protection mechanisms in place, while we know that the lakes within those ecosystems are still polluted. And so enforcement of those protection mechanisms is critical. So this is the first acceleration action which we encourage countries to take forwards. The second acceleration action to protect freshwater ecosystems is to increase the uptake of freshwater data into sectoral processes that are dependent on water. Again, it seems quite common sense, but we're seeing that freshwater data does not feed into all of the sectoral processes, both by the state and by the private sector, which are dependent on water. And therefore, very often, it's very easy to take an economically driven decision without considering the impacts of the goods and services derived from freshwater ecosystems. So the provision of freshwater data into those decision-making processes is critical. And now that we have availability of good freshwater data, as I'll show you shortly, the second message that we wish to put forward here is to encourage the uptake of that data. And I should add that the SDG indicator technical focal points in countries, as well as the SDG 6 overall focal points in countries that the EME project has identified and the custodian agencies work with, are very well placed to encourage the uptake of freshwater data across different sectoral processes. Lastly, the third message that I wish to convey here on the global level is that the first two messages really happen well and effectively if there is good coordination. And we need institutions to really consider how freshwater quantity and freshwater quality can be sustained over long periods of time, and to ensure that there is a balance of demand across different across different sectors, sorry. For example, across the domestic supply sector, across energy demand for freshwater, across agricultural demand for freshwater. And it requires good coordination to do that, to get that balance right. And again, looking at a national picture is incredibly important, but also looking at a subnational picture when it comes to freshwater ecosystems is equally important, because that's very often where hydrological processes take place, and degradation of freshwater ecosystems can occur very rapidly if there is not coordination across the relevant demands upon freshwater ecosystems. Okay, so now therefore I've just covered these high-level global trends, and I've talked about three acceleration actions that we really wish to promote among countries. Now, what I'd like to do, if technology permits, is to stop sharing this screen and to share another screen. Just check I've got my correct screen shared, sorry. Okay. Okay. I'm hoping you can see the screen that I'm currently looking at, which is the landing page to the Freshwater Ecosystems Explorer. Now, this geospatial data portal, the first thing I'd like to say about it is that it's free and open access. The URL, that's the website address, is sdg661.app. I encourage all of you to go there and to interact with this free resource on freshwater data. There are many, many functionalities that I'm not going to cover right now. I'm going to speak just for the next 10 minutes to give you a demonstration of the site and really just skim the surface on what's available. So there is an entire section that looks at the analysis. You can access the global report. You can access a range of case studies from this part of the site. There's story maps, and you can see how the changes in freshwater data actually convey to impact on the ground in this part of the site. But I'm not going to go there right now because I don't have time. I'm going to go to this long tab here, which says Explore Your Freshwater Ecosystem. When I click on there, it takes me through to a global map. And remembering that the purposes of this is to provide data and information to all countries of the world, this is a logical place for us to start. Without any particular reason, I'm going to just click on Brazil. With one click on the country of my interest, that country will appear before me, it will zoom closer to me, and a statistical dashboard will also appear on the left side of my screen. Now, this statistical dashboard currently relates to the entirety of Brazil. And Brazil, as you can see here, is delineated by the bright white line, which demarcates its administrative boundary. So the statistics here in this dashboard on my left relate to the whole country. And the statistics we're looking at are separated into different ecosystem types. So we're able to take that freshwater data, that water data from satellites, and separate that out into lakes and rivers, into reservoir data, mangroves, wetlands, and data on water quality. We're actually then able to take that a step further, and we're able to separate out the data that's on lakes and rivers into what we call permanent water. Now, if that is water that's there for 12 months of the year, and you may think of a well-known lake that you know has always been there, that's what we call a permanent water body. The satellite observations are always seeing that. We're able to then separate data out from seasonal water bodies. Now that's water that's not there all year round. It comes and it goes, and the satellite observations are able to see that it comes and it goes. So we're able to see here, in the case of Brazil, that over the course of the last 20 years, Brazil's permanent water has shrunk, it's declined. You can see the downward facing arrow, just marginally. So a very small percentage change, 1.48%, maybe quite negligible. We actually then translate that into a square kilometer figure, because of course Brazil is actually a very large country. Actually the square kilometer figure is quite noticeable. That's close to 1,000 square kilometers of permanent water that's been lost in the last 20 years. This is a long-term statistical trend that we're seeing. And that's the information that we want to try to convey on this summary analysis, these long-term statistical trends. Underneath this, where you've got seasonal water dynamics, you can actually see something quite interesting. You're able to see an almost 10% increase, again, since the year 2000, in seasonal water. So the trend in Brazil is a very slight decline in permanent water and a noticeable decline in seasonal water. So there's an increase in seasonality. We don't know what is driving that. What we're witnessing here is the factual information. The causes of that are as yet unknown to us, but that's what we would hope that countries themselves can provide. What might be driving that change? Of course, it could be human interference, or it could be climate change, very often causing seasonality changes. And we can go down this summary table of statistics here one by one. I won't go through every single one now because I don't have time, but just to say we can see that there's a decline in mangroves in Brazil, a 3.2% decline. That equates to 10,000 square kilometer decline in mangroves. So that's something significant for big countries. It's very important to be able to see these two statistics, what a percentage in an actual physical land area. We have wetlands data. We don't have a change over time yet in wetlands data. We will in the coming years. We released the first ever wetlands data set in 2020 when this data site went live. And lastly, we're able to provide this sort of high-level water quality data. And the way that we provide it as a summary statistic on this dashboard is to take the large lakes, all of them. Brazil is 132, and by large we mean something that's roughly about a square kilometer or bigger. It doesn't capture smaller lakes. And we're able to see those that we call as affected. Now, affected means that the majority of the lake has very high to extreme trophic conditions compared with a 5-year baseline period. Okay, so this is a very quick overview of the summary statistics. A couple of other functionalities that I would now like to sort of show you is to say that whilst we see this kind of numerical statistical representation of ecosystem changes, you can also visualize these changes. So if I were to click here on this double square icon, this is a map. Every single data set has one. If I click once here, although we're quite high up in space here, I'm going to zoom quite closely in. What you can see is that colors suddenly appear on your screen. It might take a little delay just to catch up over this call. I zoomed straight in here to river in northern Brazil, just to illustrate that what we're able to provide at a very, very fine resolution, down to a 30-meter resolution, is actually changes in the state of water. So we can see how water transitions between being permanent or seasonal, where either permanent or seasonal water is lost entirely. For example, where you're seeing areas of orange on the map, that is where permanent water has gone. There's no more observations of permanent water in that location. Similarly, you can see where permanent water might be increasing or seasonal water increasing, or they transition between one and another. So seasonal water suddenly becomes permanent. So these transitions are very important, and you can do it for every single location on the map. So what this functionality shows here is not just that you can see these high-level statistics, but that you can zoom right down into an area of your choice to see these different changes. And as I said, you can actually do this for all of the data sets we have available. So very quickly, if I click on the mangroves data set, mangroves are of course coastal. I'm going to zoom in just to the coastline, just so you can very quickly see. I won't spend too long here. And again, I apologize just for the delay in this. It's just the way it operates when you do this over a video call. But again, you're down to a 30-meter resolution. Areas highlighted in red are where you've got mangrove loss. Anything bright green is mangrove gain. And anything in this sort of yellowy green color is where you've got stable mangrove. So you can see this, this total national statistic, but you can also zoom right in very close along the coastline, and you can pinpoint where there is mangrove loss. And of course, all of this data is trying to encourage users of the site to take actions that protect and restore these freshwater ecosystems. And of course, they need to know where those changes are happening. We have wetlands data. If I just click on the wetland map, you can see that wetlands appear. And very, very quickly, if I click on the turbidity map of what will appear here, I'm going to zoom out so you can see it a little better, is all of the lakes in Brazil. It's very, very easy straight away to identify those particular lakes. So I just scroll down on the dashboard here. It's quick to identify those particular lakes which are experiencing high and extreme turbid conditions, or indeed even the parts of the lakes which, you know, so this lake here, this would not be a lake that's considered to be affected because not the entirety of the lake has turbid conditions. Just so that you know, there is also a functionality on the site to click on specific lakes and get lake-specific data. So here I've highlighted one lake. It's called Balbina. With water quality data, I'm able to actually identify any lake. I can click specifically on that lake, and it will give me very detailed analysis specifically on that lake. Okay, now the last two functionalities that I just want to show you, I'm going to zoom back out so you can see these. One is that, let me just get to the right area here. Okay, one is that if I click on, as you can see inside Brazil, the country is being delineated. It's been delineated by river basins. And this is important, of course, because decisions on hydrological processes and freshwater ecosystems are made at this scale. If I click on one of these river basins, and I'm intentionally clicking one on a border, the statistics in the dashboard are updated only for that river basin. In the same way that when I clicked on just the lake, the statistics for the water quality is updated in the dashboard. This is really important that the area you click on, the statistical dashboard correlates to it. Now, as I mentioned, I intentionally clicked on a transboundary basin here, and because it's about a basin that goes into Peru, a secondary dashboard appears here with the statistics on freshwater changes relevant to the proportion of the area of the basin that's within Peru. Two last functions. One, if you click on this drop-down function here, you can actually change the hydrobasin level. in your country. So you can either make it very, you can have big basins, or you can have much smaller basins. And this allows you to really get into very fine level of detail. The smallest basin area, for example, is around 250 square kilometers. You can also select different administrative areas. If you don't want to have your water data in a basin area, you can select these two administrative areas. These generally work for many countries in the world, not all, but these often correlate with sort of districts or subnational areas, administrative boundaries in countries. Before I close and hand over to Gavin to field some questions, the last function I'd like to show is what's called advanced analysis. So every single data set here has an advanced analysis. That takes you beyond the summary statistics and allows you to see further back in time, right back to 1984. We can get year-by-year analysis. You can see the information presented not just statistically, but graphically in a variety of forms. You can see seasonal data presented in categories of months to help countries identify which periods of the year they might be seeing the highest seasonality changes. And again, you can do this nationally, subnationally, or at a river basin scale. And every single data set has this advanced analysis function. Every single data set also has an ability to download and extract that information in a variety of formats. That can be these specific graphs, it can be the CSV files, the statistics themselves, or indeed, if you have the capacity, you can also access the shape files. So we try to make everything that I've shown you available in every format that we can, to ultimately encourage you to take decisions that protect and restore your freshwater ecosystems. I've covered a lot of ground there. I'm going to pause. And now I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Gavin Reynolds, and to see if you have any questions, then I'll be happy to answer any questions or any comments that you might wish to put my way about anything that I've mentioned so far. Gavin, please, over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. An excellent presentation. Once again, such an interesting tool. And you have generated some interest on the chat. A few questions here. We'll just take them one at a time as they've come in. The first one, Eric Garcia. Has the information generated by UNEP already been sent to all member countries for validation? I believe this is a good strategy since many countries do not have the national inventory of lakes and wetlands. And in that sense, with this information, we would have a unique baseline at global level. So the question is, has the information been sent to member countries for validation? And probably what is that process?
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for that question. And of course, the answer is yes. And you know, the SDG Agenda 20 framework is very much about being a nationally driven process. It so happens that environmental data is incredibly, especially dynamic environmental data, is incredibly hard to monitor for countries. And when we first asked countries to provide this data, most countries in the world did not have it. Hence, we use the satellite approach, which does provide an incredible wealth of data. And absolutely, we spend a great deal of time sharing this data with national focal points that we pre-identified. And we released this last data set in 2020, and we spent many months during 2020 engaging with national focal points to do exactly that, to seek approval of the summary statistics. And those summary statistics, when and only we have approval from countries, we report to the United Nations Statistics Division, and they are official statistics. And that's the national level statistics. Of course, we also try to go a step further, as I said, to provide additional subnational data here. But yes, very much so. It's very important that we have this national approval process. And may I add one more thing, Gavin? I'm sorry, but that's also to say that the data that we provide here fits within the 661 monitoring methodology. That is actually our guiding framework. And that monitoring methodology is comprised of lots of separate methodologies that have all been approved by the interagency expert group on SDGs, which is effectively operate on behalf of countries to ensure that that methodology is statistically robust and internationally comparable.
Excellent, Stuart. Thank you. And I think you've managed to answer another question at the same time while you're doing that. So that's a 2-for-1 deal. The next question's a couple of questions from Chandrini Ragubur. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. First off, how does the SDG indicator 632 on ambient water quality link to this indicator 661? If you could clarify that. And the second question, are statistics available for countries such as small islands, and what are the different levels of information available for different countries?
Thank you for both of those questions. So on the first question regarding water quality, ambient water quality data under SDG indicator 632, that's also an indicator to which the UNEP is the custodian, and it's not. The in-situ data measurements do not currently form part of these global data that we derive from satellites. And it's not to say that it cannot, because it can, but what the current approach that we've taken is to have this data portal for 661 available to countries to download these water quality data on turbidity and trophic state at those large lake levels, and to be able to see those trends, those statistical data trends, and for countries themselves to then see how indicator 632 in situ data measurements may correlate and correspond with those. So we're asking countries themselves and those focal points to try to paint that broader picture. As I say, it's not to say that those two things can't be brought together in the future on one particular site, and maybe there is a route ahead in that regard. In answer to the second question, small island developing states, there are 3 small island developing states for which we were unable to detect any surface water data from satellites. But for other small island developing states, if there are any water body on the piece of land that is greater than a 30 square meter size, that information will get picked up by the satellite and will be included. So it will form part of this data. So we do have data for the majority of UN member states.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Stuart. And so moving on, with the questions are coming in thick and fast, so I'll put them out thick and fast. From Petra Wisnowski, 3 questions here, quite data-centric. Can the spatial data be downloaded or transferred to be used in GIS?
Yes.
Various GIS software. Second question, what is the confidence interval of the data, and is there a uniform methodology of primary data collection available for referencing? And third question from the same person, could you elaborate a bit more on data exportation, please?
Yes.
All you could find, yeah, just to do that.
Very good. And just to answer that, so what I've done, if you see my screen, I've switched over into the homepage, and from the homepage here, there is a downloads section. And this download section is going to basically answer all of those questions, and I encourage countries to go there. You can download data and information directly from the map part of the site, but if you really want to get into the all of the large CSV files, those spatial files, it's all in this download section. You simply go there, everything is exportable. So all I would do here, you can see that there's geotiffs, and you can see the wealth of data here. You find your country, you can do it, you can get the entire time series of data, and or you can get year by year. And of course, there's an enormous volume of data there. So it's yes to every single question you just posed. It's all here, including the shape files. Here's all the shape files listed per country here. So it's all contained under that download section.
Thanks, Stuart. That's excellent. And then a couple more questions which are linked, so I'll put them together. First off, what is the minimum mapping unit of this global data for lakes and wetlands? And is this information from the Global Surface Water Explorer by ESA or from other sources? And then a second question, with the information given by the platform shown, could we determine indicator 661 in a specific river basin?
Okay, and actually I just realized now I did not answer one of the earlier questions about the accuracy of the data, which links to the Global Surface Water Explorer question a little bit. So each of the data sets that we have available comes from published methodologies, and so the majority of the data that we have is derived from the Global Surface Water Explorer, which comes from the European Commission. But what UNEP do with partners is we turn that data into more meaningful data per ecosystem type, per country area, and per basin. And that's how we're able to take that data that's on the Surface Water Explorer and turn it into natural water body trends and artificial water body trends, permanent and seasonal trends, and so on. And of course, that Global Surface Water Explorer has been around for a few years. It has an incredibly high accuracy rate. I don't recall the figure off the top of my head, but it's either 95% or 98%, I think now. It's always increasing the accuracy. The methodology to behind that provision of data is published in the journal Nature. So it's very scientifically robust. It's very, very accurate. It has huge amounts of ground truthing. So yes, we have a high level of confidence in the data. And similarly, the Joint Research Centre from the Commission also provide the water quality product. You may be interested to know. I've forgotten, Gavin, the second part of that question. Oh yes, so the river can this information be provided at a river level, or can you just reword that question for me?
The question was, with the information given by the platform shown, we could determine indicator 661 in a specific river basin, so at the basin level.
Yes. And this is a really important point, and thank you for asking that question, whomever that was. The reason we've selected basins is that although we have lake-specific data, what we know occurs is that the interdependency of hydrological processes, and it happens at the hydrological scale, which is a river basin, a watershed, if you prefer that term. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons we've selected basins. And so you can determine as you saw, if I select on one basin, you can see your statistical trends per ecosystem type in a river basin. And it's incredibly important that we separate them out, because what you might see when you click on one river basin is, for example, your natural lakes and rivers declining and your artificial rivers increasing. And there might be a relationship between those things. And that's why the river basin scale, you'll be able to see that relationship. So it really is important that you can investigate river basin level hydrological changes. And this site absolutely allows you to do that.
Excellent, Stuart. A few more questions here. One is a little bit cut off, asking if we have a focal person or official validator, and the country is cut off, but it comes back to questions we've been asked before about how do people contact or find out about the 661 focal person in their country or in a specific country.
Thank you for that question, and that is an important question, because so yeah, what UNEP have generated is, and we spent time doing this, reaching out to different institutions and countries, and we sort of came down through sort of central government. Normally, is we have SDG indicated technical focal points, and we have a 661 focal point in pretty much every single country. And so whichever country it was that asked that question can, of course, get in touch with me. And at the end of this presentation, you'll see my email address and I can connect you with that 661 focal point. Just to say that we also have SDG 6 focal points in many countries in the world, not all, but in about 120. And that SDG 6 focal point can also join dots across other indicators, for example, 632 that was mentioned earlier. So I'll be happy to make those connections. They'll also, just so you know, at the end of the presentation soon, after, if you could please leave your details in the chat, or afterwards you'll get a message to say please leave your email and institution name. If you do that, then it allows us to share this presentation with you and to continue to engage with you after this. Please do provide your information. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, Gavin. We probably have time for one more question.
Yes, we have one sort of a broader question from Deval Pandya, asking, what is the role of rainwater in freshwater ecosystems, and how do they interact? I think that's quite a broad question, Stuart, but if you can give a brief, precise answer on that broader question, would be very useful.
So certainly, yes, I mean, of course, yes, rainwater, of course, is one of the primary sources of inflow into river basins and therefore into freshwater ecosystems themselves. And of course, that rainfall is coming through the rivers into our lakes, retained into our wetlands. It's captured largely through source watershed areas, and that can be highly elevated areas such as mountains, or indeed very densely forested areas where we have increased precipitation. But of course, rainfall is absolutely fundamental to the hydrological cycle, and yes, it's the main source of water into freshwater ecosystems. I'm sorry that doesn't do the answer justice because there's more to it, but I recognise the clock is ticking and that we have to finish on time. So if it's okay, then I would be happy to field any further questions that anyone has. If you please leave them in the chat function, and as I said, please register yourself, and I will follow up after this webinar and to answer any questions you may have. Maybe, Gavin, now I could just hand back to you and you can provide any closing remarks on the session to allow us to close on time. And thank you, everybody, for listening to me.
Thanks so much, Stuart, for an excellent presentation of this very interesting and exciting tool. It's every time I see it, the level of detail and the ability to drill down and get such fine scale information, as well as having the broad scale information, is so very, very interesting. So thanks to you and Joachim and our colleagues from UN Water for making this seminar possible. It's been very, very interesting. Thanks to all the audience for your active engagement and your interesting questions. It's an absolutely vital part of this process is the engagement and the interaction we have. And please continue this engagement, primarily by accessing the Explorer and looking up the information and finding out the information that you need for your country, but also sharing the information and sharing the portal with your networks, not just governmental, but also within other agencies within your country, because the information is there to be used, and by using it, we are making progress. Of course, monitoring is important, but action is necessary to create change. And we encourage you all to take action, use this information to take action, and also to share your action by engaging with the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, which is part of the SDG situation. And finally, I'd like you all, as Stuart said, he's got his email up here on the screen now, encourage you all to continue your active engagement with Stuart and the Freshwater Ecosystem Explorer. It would be very great to create an active community around understanding and action around the freshwater ecosystems and SDG 661. So please remain engaged, and we look forward to talking to you more in the future. Thank you very much, and thank you, Stuart, again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.